Hello and welcome to my channel, iWinTOLOSE Gaming. As of 2 years of Genshin Impact's release, we now have 27 5-star characters that can be pulled from the gacha. And I'm one of the few privileged individuals who has used all of them extensively at Constellation 6. In today's video, I'm going to rank each and every one of the 27 5-star characters Constellation 6's. We are all aware of the interesting design choices miHoYo has put into some of their characters' Constellation 6's, some of them ranging from practically useless to completely and utterly broken. In today's video, I'll be going over my ratings for each of these constellations as well as my reasons behind it. And there might be a bit of bias on miHoYo's part towards waifu constellations. Obviously, Genshin Impact loves its waifus, but so does today's sponsor, Path to Nowhere. Path to Nowhere is a cutting-edge tower defense game filled to the brim with some of the best waifu designs on the mobile market. Collect badass criminal waifus such as Zoya, boss of the Violent Legion gang, and Wendy, the crazy chainsaw waifu, and you'll also unlock special voice lines and their backstories by increasing their compliance level. You can also select the gender of the chief who is your main character and select any of the available languages for the voice acting. These criminal waifus are called sinners. Command them to fight the evil monsters threatening Earth. Path to Nowhere has tons of gameplay modes such as dozens of story stages, puzzle games, roguelike mechanics, and more. And unlike most tower defense games, you actually get to move your characters during a fight. Seriously, why hasn't everyone been doing this? Use your 400 gigabrain IQ to deploy your Sinner's ultimates to trigger a core breakthrough against elite monsters to do terrible damage. Path to Nowhere is available now on iOS and Android. Smash that link down below in the description or scan the QR code here on the screen to play the game for free. Also use my gift code PTNIWINTOLOSE for a ton of in-game rewards. Huge thanks to Path to Nowhere for sponsoring today's video. Alright, so how am I ranking these constellations? Honestly, just off my knowledge, some math, and a lot of experience with all these characters. Also, I'm ranking their Constellation 6's. This means that some characters who have incredible earlier constellations may not get as high of a rating due to their Constellation 6 not being very good. But of course, I will point that out when talking about said characters. Anyway, we've got a whopping 27 characters to talk about, so let's get started. We're gonna go chronologically, starting with the original standard banner 5-star characters available to use from losing 50/50s. Diluc was the poster child for main DPS characters on release date, but how good is his Constellation 6? Unfortunately, due to the way his Constellation 6 works, at times it can be messy to use due to messing up your combo string timings thanks to the super slow N4. It barely increases his overall damage output. However, it is satisfying to get some large N4 vapes that normally aren't really practical to do. Overall, I'm giving this one a 2 slime out of 5 slime rating, mostly for the situational large M4 vapes that are fun to do. Jean is the next standard banner character to talk about, and unfortunately her Constellation 6, from a meta perspective, is largely useless. 35% damage reduction on your character might sound like a lot, but you're already basically invincible in Jean's field due to the incredible healing it provides. Genshin Impact is rarely about surviving enemy attacks, and instead it's mostly about murdering the cute fauna of Teyvat as fast as possible. And Jean's Constellation 6 doesn't help you at all with this. Sadly, a 1 slime out of 5 slime rating. But hey, you do get this fancy visual effect. Keqing's Constellation 6 is unfortunately just not great. It doesn't add any new mechanics to play around with like Diluc's Constellation 6. 6 to 24% electro damage that also requires some ramp up time is simply a minuscule buff by today's standards. But because it still does increase Keqing's damage by a non-negligible few percentage points, I'm giving it half a slime more than a 1 slime rating, so a 1.5 out of 5 slimes. Now Mona is a character with some solid earlier constellations. Earlier I mentioned that I'm focusing on their Constellation 6's. So while both her Constellations 1 and 4 are nice for her supporting capabilities, her Constellation 6 is sadly unusable. This is one of the most impractical mechanics in the entire game. You have to be dashing for 3 entire seconds to get the full 180% damage bonus. I can only see this being semi-useful for Monas in the overworld, but really there are so many better options for auto attack users in the overworld. This is also almost completely useless in Abyss 12, an unfortunate 1 slime rating for the clunkiest constellation in the entire game. The last original standard banner character is everyone's favorite character to lose their 50/50s to, Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi's Constellation 6 unquestionably deserves a 6 slime rating, one for each additional 50/50 that you lost. Simply put, you can brag to your friends just how miserably unlucky you were to lose so many 50/50s to our favorite adorable undead healer. One nice thing about Constellation 6 Chi-Chi is that if you have a character that you dislike, you can now murder them 4 times in a row, with Barbara's Constellation 6, an egg, and then Chi-Chi's Constellation 6. Wasting so many Primo Gems losing 50/50s is why I gave Chi-Chi's Constellation 6 a 6 slime out of 100 slime rating. So our first banner character is Venti, who was released on patch 1.0. Venti's Constellation 6 is a decent one on its own, shredding resistances of the infused element by 20%. Unfortunately, there are a few reasons why I'm not going to rate this highly. First of all, the resistance shred is actually quite situational as it only shreds the infused element. Many characters, especially vapors and melters, rely on reacting with the infused element and thus don't benefit from this Constellation 6. Next, resistance shred is only half as effective once resistances are under 0%, and finally you need to get Constellations 1 through 5, which are all basically useless, just for his Constellation 6. This is an extremely expensive way to get a situationally small damage gain. I'm giving this one a 2 slime out of 5 slime rating. Our adorable pyromaniac Klee also happens to have a Constellation 6, and while it might look okay on paper, providing plenty of team energy and 10% pyro damage bonus, that's where the good ends. Klee is extremely outdated as an on-field main DPS character, which is unfortunately what her Constellation 6 forces her to become. While not terrible, other Constellation 6s in the game are eons better than Klee's, so sadly I can't give her Constellation 6 any higher than a 1.5 slime rating out of 5 slimes. Nowadays, Klee is primarily used for her Constellation 2 for specific nuking scenarios, so her Constellation 6 is far from recommended, and honestly kind of a waste of Primo Gems. After Klee comes another child, the man-child, name-child, Tartaglia. Tartaglia's Constellation 6 was originally viewed to be incredible, bypassing what was perceived as a major weakness of his by resetting his E's cooldown. However, as time went on and players got better at the game, we all realized just how unnecessary his Constellation 6 is, as you rarely need to keep Tartaglia on the field for very long. Now, it's not completely useless because it can open up some very specific and niche speedrunning rotations that otherwise wouldn't be possible, but due to how niche it is and how it doesn't directly increase his damage numbers, it gets a 1.5 slime rating out of 5 slimes. It also doesn't help that Child's other constellations aren't very useful at all. And after Child came the ultimate Child discipliner, Zhongli. Zhongli's Constellation 6 provides some healing based on his shield taking damage, which adds additional utility to his already insanely overpowered shield. Unfortunately, this is another Constellation 6 that doesn't add damage, and although the healing is nice and adds actually a completely different functionality to it, it still feels uncomfortable in many situations to rely entirely on his shield's healing over that of a healer. Since it's not completely useless, I'm giving it also a 1.5 slime out of 5 slime rating. Albedo came out after Zhongli, and unfortunately a measly 17% bonus damage for a Constellation 6 is absolutely pathetic. Imagine spending around $1,000 for one of the tiniest gains in damage from a Constellation 6 in the entire game. However, because again it's not completely useless and does situationally add some non-negligible damage to the on-field character, it also gets a 1.5 slime out of 5 slime rating from me. Albedo is another character that still has oldly designed constellations, and if you can't tell by now, most of these older characters have very mediocre Constellation 6s. Alright, so we've reached the first character with an incredible Constellation 6. That character is, unsurprisingly, Ganyu. Ganyu's Constellation 6 allows her to output an insane amount of front-loaded damage. The amazing thing about her is that her skill ceiling is also rising with every patch and every Abyss 12. Even today, Ganyu is still setting plenty of records when it comes to speed running, and although her Constellations 1 through 5 aren't good at all, her Constellation 6 alone makes up for it and makes it one of the best Constellation 6s in the entire game. Her Constellation 6 deserves an easy 5 slime out of 5 slime rating. And right after Ganyu comes Xiao. A lot of theory crafters believe Xiao's Constellation 6 to be broken, essentially doubling his, at the time, very high raw elemental DPS. However, in practice, Constellation 6 for Xiao is very limiting. Needing 2 targets makes it useless against most bosses, and the needle-thin hitbox makes it very difficult to hit everything that you actually want to hit with it. The auto-targeting is incredibly janky, and it does nothing to ameliorate Xiao's energy issues. As fun and flashy as it looks, due to how situational and honestly not even great performance since Xiao has barely set any records since his release, I'm giving it a 3 slime out of 5 slime rating. This is still likely higher than what I built it up to be, because in a few situations where it does work, it actually works really well and it can be a great constellation, but again, it is severely situational and limited. Up next is the prankster coffin slinger Hu Tao. So Hu Tao has a bit of a conundrum when it comes to her Constellation 6. Since it increases her crit rate to 100%, this means you want to stack as much crit damage as possible. But when you do this, it means that you'll basically never crit outside of when her Constellation 6 is active. Compounded with the fact that in the endgame content, Abyss 12, you start 12-1-1 with 100% HP, thus making this constellation unusable for the first few E's. And this constellation quickly becomes a pain to use, due to its long 60-second cooldown. If Abyss 12 reset ability cooldowns, I'd actually rate this a bit higher, but because you need to wait for an entire minute every single attempt to use this, I can't give it any higher than a 3 slime out of 5 slime rating. Eula is another character whose Constellation 6 redefined Constellation 6s. Eula's Constellation 6 essentially takes her burst and slaps on a 100 to 200,000 damage nuke immediately on top of it. This allows Eula to perform quick swap nukes as well as to hit some of the largest nuke numbers in the entire game. It allows Eula to have a front-loaded consistent 200,000-ish damage nuke, or even a back-loaded crit-fish 1.8 million-ish nuke. Really, the damage range is colossal, because it has set plenty of records both in speedrunning times as well as in damage per thumbnails. I'm giving this one a 5 slime out of 5 slime rating. After Eula's release came one of the best characters in the entire game, Kazuha. So you might see my 2.5 slime out of 5 slime rating for Kazuha's Constellation 6 and think, well, hear me out. Kazuha is honestly already a completely ridiculous character just at Constellation 2. Countless speedruns and records were set by yours truly as well as many others by Constellation 2 Kazuha's, as his elemental mastery builds swirls are generally enough to wipe out weak mobs, and he's typically built to maximize someone else's damage. However, Constellation 6 does open up the option for even stronger Kazuha damage output and can allow him to one-shot an occasional wave here or there. But outside of some niche scenarios like Billy competitions where you are heavily restricted on characters and thus end up using main DPS Kazuhas, or wiping out a very niche wave due to the slightly increased damage from his plunges, his Constellation 6 is actually more niche than you might expect. As such, I think it deserves a 2.5 slime out of 5 slime rating. Up next is Kamisato Ayaka, and her Constellation 6 can be rated in a couple of ways. In a vacuum, I believe her Constellation 6 only deserves a 3 slime out of 5 slime rating. Most of her damage without a certain support comes from her Colossal Burst, which won't gain any benefits past Constellation 4. Her Constellation 6's boosted charge attacks are still good though, and can wipe out weak waves as well as being an amazing tool for the overworld. However, if we consider another upcoming character, Ayaka's Constellation 6 will indeed deserve a much higher rating, which I'll talk about once we get to that character. Yoimiya came shortly after Ayaka, and her Constellation 6 is a bit controversial. Some whales actually didn't activate Yoimiya's Constellation 6 for a very long time, as they value the ability to reliably vape her N5 above the additional random raw pyro damage that her Constellation 6 adds. Yoimiya's Constellation 6 though is great for casual play and just for improving her damage output, but because the damage gain of around 30% or so isn't as colossal as many of the previous constellations, and because of the unreliability for vaping her N5 after activating her Constellation 6, I'm giving it a reasonable but not incredible 3.5 slimes out of 5 slimes. And poor Yoimiya being sandwiched between OP characters began right here, because after her came the Raiden Shogun herself. Most of us know by now that Raiden's power gains really come from her Constellations 2 and 3. Constellations 4 through 6 are surprisingly not that great and highly unnecessary. Her Constellation 6 in particular isn't as powerful as one might think, since it doesn't affect her own cooldown. And since she has a long 18-second burst, this means that at best, it typically shortens her team's rotations by about 2 seconds, seconds, since her right-handed Tengu has a 20-second cooldown burst, thus making it align with Raiden's 18-second burst. But because of the quality of life this actually provides by saving 2 seconds every retry attempt for an Abyss 12 chamber, I'm still going to give this a 2 slime out of 5 slime rating. Alright, we can make Kokomi's section a bit quicker than the others. Kokomi's constellations basically just increase her own damage output. Since Kokomi's damage is fairly low, increasing low damage numbers a bit higher isn't going to do a whole lot. However, it does make her noticeably more powerful, and although you won't be setting any records thanks to her constellations, Kokomi does become a very consistent DPS character thanks to her Constellation 6. It deserves a low but reasonable 2.5 slime out of 5 slime rating. Up next is Arataki Itto, and his Constellation 6 is basically Xiao's done right. Sprinkle in a bit of RNG for a bit of fun, and a lot of fun just spamming his Keisagiri slashes, you can potentially infinitely slash your enemies to death. This improves his usability as well as his DPS substantially. It deserves a very solid 4 slime out of 5 slime rating. Hey, and do you remember Ayaka? Well, we're going to talk about her shortly because Shenhe is up next. Shenhe's Constellation 6 in a vacuum, in my opinion, deserves a 3 slime out of 5 slime rating. Her Constellation 6 when combined with Chongyun can turn almost any melee character into roughly Xiao levels of DPS. This in itself already makes it an awesomely fun and decently powerful Constellation 6. However, what really sets it apart is when it's used in conjunction with Ayaka's or Ganyu's Constellation 6s. Ayaka's Constellation 6 plus Shenhe's Constellation 6 absolutely deserves a 5 slime rating out of 5 slime, as it allows Ayaka to one-shot waves with just her charge attack, which is absolutely insane. Our Foxy Yae Miko is up next, and her Constellation 6 is an interesting one. It turns her turrets into complete murder machines, completely shifting where the bulk of her damage comes from. Thanks to her ridiculous scaling with money, Yae's turrets go from some pretty low few thousands of damage to colossal 170,000 plus turret zaps. Yae Miko instantly becomes one of the best options for the overworld as well as for casual Abyss 12 runs. However, the lack of general record setting for speedruns does hold it back in my eyes. As such, I'm giving it still a great 4.5 slime out of 5 slime rating. Ayato also has a great Constellation 6 that front loads a good chunk of damage. What's doubly great about it is that you can reliably vape at least the first slash as well, and with a very solidly large multiplier to boot. This allows Ayato to generally wipe out an additional wave in a multi-wave chamber inside of Venti's Tornado. It's definitely a great Constellation 6, and I'm going to give it a great 4.5 slime out of 5 slime rating. And next we have what's likely the most broken Constellation 6 in the entire game, Yelan. Yelan has really changed everything when it comes to whale characters in Genshin Impact. Her Constellation 6 front loads a ridiculous amount of damage and can be retained and stored for later use by swapping her off. It's literally an on-demand delete button that supplements her already broken burst multipliers. Yelan has been destroying leaderboards since her release and is sure to continue her rampage for a very long time. Her Constellation 6 deserves a resounding 5 slimes out of 5 slimes rating. We've reached patch 3.0 and a recent shift in MiHoYo's Constellation designs in my opinion. Tighnari is a decent character with a strong and fun Constellation 6. It improves his frame data substantially, thus allowing him to be played as even more of a quick swap character than he already was. It also increases his main source of damage output. Unfortunately, Tighnari is not setting any records with monsters like Ganyu, Yelan, Ayaka, and Raiden around, so I'm gonna give this a 3.5 slime out of 5 slime rating. And similarly to Tighnari, Cyno is another post-Dendro character. His Constellation 6 also feels like a Sumeru Constellation 6, being solid but not feeling as crazy broken as some of the earlier ones. Cyno himself has many of the same weaknesses as Xiao in his inability to swap off, his energy issues, and lack of front-loaded nuke damage. But at Constellation 6, his sustained damage output is very good. But due to Cyno's overall problems and lack of stellar performances at Constellation 6 currently, I'm giving his Constellation 6 a 3.5 slime out of 5 slimes. Nilo is the latest addition, and her Constellation 6 is a simple yet effective one. It effectively provides 20 entire crit rolls, making this one of the largest stat gains from a Constellation in the entire game. It allows Nilo to be much more reliably played as a Hydro DPS character, outputting massive vapes with either her burst or her elemental skill. However, like Cyno and Tighnari, she's currently struggling to claim top speedrun times compared to other Constellation 6 5-star characters, but in my opinion she's still doing better than Cyno and Tighnari overall due to the power of vape. As such, I'm giving her Constellation 6 a 4 slime out of 5 slime rating. Now I'm going to quickly sort these constellations from best to worst. As we can see, Chi-Chi's Constellation 6 is the best in the game, garnering you the most sympathy from your peers. Now, all kidding aside, I do think Yelan has the best Constellation 6 in the game. It turns her into a front-loaded DPS monster with plenty of sustained DPS and allows her to effortlessly handle literally everything in the game that isn't water immune. Constellation 6 Yelan has been performing absurdly well since her release, being both easy to use and setting countless records. Then of course we have the Cryo Girls, Ganyu, Shenhe, and Ayaka, all with absurdly synergistic Constellation 6s. Out of these three though, Constellation 6 Ganyu is very powerful even without Constellation 6 Shenhe, whereas Ayaka's Constellation 6 is only amazing with Shenhe's Constellation 6. As for the other characters, well, I've ordered them in what I think are best to worst. Now do check out today's sponsor, Path to Nowhere. I actually do plan to try the game and play it personally, as it looks like a fun waifu collector tower defense game. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is IWinToLose, signing out.
いい度胸ね。終わりね。撤収。急がせ。